Okay, well, Michael, you are known for saying there is no second best, but I just saw a presentation that you gave where in the title you had crypto renaissance. I'm getting the sense that your views on the broader crypto industry are changing, and you mentioned there will be other digital currencies, the tokenization of assets. Can you clarify your views and your forecast on this whole space?
Michael Saylor strikes again. This time he's dropping Bitcoin bombshells on the growing acceptance and potential of Bitcoin. This is not one to miss.
Yes, I think if you had asked me before November 5th what's going to happen, I would say in the event of a blue wave, Bitcoin's going to grind up against resistance and continue to grow, despite a not progressive regime, but it's going to continue to grow because it's unstoppable. And I would have said the digital assets industry is going to continue to shrink and continue to decay in the event of a blue wave. So there was a bifurcation, Bitcoin going up 20 or 30% a year and digital assets falling 20% or 30% a year in the event of a blue wave. In the event of a red wave, I would say Bitcoin is going to blast up, not grind up, but blast up. It's going to power up much faster because now you have a pro-Bitcoin president, a pro-Bitcoin Congress, pro-Bitcoin legislation. We'll have pro-Bitcoin banks. We're going to have pro-Bitcoin institutions. We're going to have pro-Bitcoin mining, etc. So I think that Bitcoin goes from that powering up at 20% to blasting up much faster than that. And I think that the digital assets industry goes from decaying 20% now to blasting up and growing, because the digital assets industry, it can't really prosper in the absence of a digital assets framework, which meets three criteria. It needs to be ethically sound. It needs to be economically sound, right? And engineeringly sound, technically sound. It needs to be sound technically, physically sound. So a technical, ethical, economic framework in order to build an entire digital assets industry. So there's no enthusiasm for putting that forward in the previous administration. Now there is enthusiasm, and we'll get one. We've got a promise that we will get a digital assets framework. And I think within that framework, there's clearly a lot of value to be created. If you create digital securities, then what that would mean is you could tokenize a share of Apple stock and you could trade it on a digital exchange on Saturday. And you could even tokenize the Apple stock and you could take self-custody of your Apple shares on your iPhone. And if you can have your photos on an iPhone and your books on your iPhone, and if you can have your files on an iPhone, and if you can have your Bitcoin on an iPhone, why can't you have your Apple stock on an iPhone? So I think that a digital securities framework is very compelling. People want to trade on the weekends. They want to trade on the evenings. They want to, what happens right now? There's like one company that can trade Apple stock. What happens when there's 1,500 companies that can trade Apple stock?
If self-custody becomes the standard for assets like stocks, as he suggests, doesn't this validate Bitcoin's role as the foundation for a decentralized financial system? It's not just about trading. It's about empowering individuals to control their wealth fully.
What happens when 8 billion people or 6 billion people with smartphones? What happens when people with Android phones can custody Apple stock, right? It's not a complicated idea. Is it technically possible? Sure it is, with modern cryptography. We solved the problem with Bitcoin, right? And modern cryptography has solved the problem. It's just there's no legal, ethical, technical, agreed upon technical protocol to do it. So I think digital securities are very powerful, and you could see first billions, then trillions, tens of trillions of dollars of analog securities become tokenized and become digital. And I don't have an ethical problem with it. For example, I wouldn't recommend that you invest in Apple or Amazon or Facebook or Google over Bitcoin. The truth is, I wouldn't recommend Bitcoin over my own stock. I would recommend it over anybody else's stock. It's Bitcoin, right? I mean, so I wouldn't really recommend any of 50,000 public companies, but I would say the world's a better place if they all tokenize, if they're all digital, right? I mean, it's pretty clear if on Sunday afternoon you have the option to buy, sell, trade, or transfer your stock, you're empowered. And that's good for the world, and that's good for the people. I think if you move to, say, digital currencies, I consider a Tether or a Circle, a stable coin, a digital currency. I think that, that a clear regulatory framework where a corporation can issue them, back them by US dollars or US dollar equivalents like short-term treasury bills. I think if you can do that, that's a good thing for the world. If Tether's going to do it, we should have Tether relocate to the United States.
What happens when financial freedom is no longer tied to traditional banking hours or limited by borders? Imagine billions of people with smartphones gaining the ability to trade, transfer, or hold assets like Apple stock in real time, any day of the week. Wouldn't this kind of accessibility shift the balance of financial power away from institutions and into the hands of everyday people? Bitcoin paved the way, and its success shows that the infrastructure is already here. It's now about building the legal and ethical frameworks to make this future a reality.
Give them a license in the U.S. and let them do it. And I also think, though, you ought to let J.P. Morgan do it and Goldman Sachs do it. And I think you ought to let Circle do it. I think there should be a competition in the market. And if it turns out that Tether and Circle are better than J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs, then I think Tether and Circle should issue all the digital currency in the world. If you're the United States, you just want, you don't want $150 billion of currency. You want $15 trillion worth of US digital currency to be circulating. So I think that that's good for the world, good for the dollar, right? Because you said, well, how does Bitcoin deal with 150 other currencies? Or maybe there's 120. Well, the dirty secret is they're all pegged to the dollar, except for the failing ones. There's only two types of currencies in the world. Well, there's three types of currencies in the world, Natalie, if you break it all down. There's currencies that are explicitly pegged to the dollar, right? Mm-hmm. The DRAM, explicitly pegged to the dollar. The CNY, explicitly pegged to the dollar, right? There's a lot of those currencies where so China, they keep it exactly pegged to the dollar. It's just the US dollar. Then there's another set of currencies that quote unquote float, and they do this, plus or minus 5%. Yep. They're nominally pegged to the dollar, right? The Swiss franc, the euro, all of these, they're not really floating. They're just enough of a floating to make it interesting. But as soon as they get too strong or too weak, the monetary authorities move to bring them back into parity with the dollar. Nobody really wants them to move. So they're on the dollar standard as well. And then there's a third set of currencies that don't bother to be pegged to the dollar. They would be the Naira, the Venezuelan Bolivar, right? There's whatever they use in Cuba, right? And the Lebanese pound, the Turkish lira, they all fall in the category of collapsing, failing. So you pretty much got every currency that sort of works is pegged to the dollar, and every other currency is failing, and so they don't work.
Why settle for outdated currency systems when technology offers a clear path forward? If the U.S. embraced digital dollars at scale, competing on innovation rather than legacy systems, couldn't it lead to stronger global influence and financial stability? Bitcoin's resilience has shown the power of decentralization, and applying that principle to the dollar could bring untold benefits to economies worldwide while sidelining collapsing currencies.
So how does Bitcoin, sit next to them? It's not competing with the dollar. What's going to happen is if the U.S. licenses digital currency and we go from 150 billion in stablecoin to 1.5 trillion to 15 trillion, it just means there's going to be a demand for $15 trillion of US sovereign debt that's going to be bought by the digital currency companies, which is why, of course, you would just put them in the US, have them audited by, if we dropped the war on crypto, auditors would audit the stablecoin companies. They could do business with the banks. They could relocate to the US. They would buy up $10 trillion worth of US sovereign debt, and they would compete with US banks, and may the better company win, and the winners would be the American people, the world, right? Market economics and the future, right? You know, that's the winner. Who's the losers, Natalie? The loser would be every crappy, weak currency in the world, every mismanaged, every regime that's managed less efficiently than the United States. You know, and I know we're oftentimes critical at home, but the truth of the matter is everywhere else is worse.
Yeah.
I mean, Sri Lanka is worse. China is worse. Russia is worse. Everywhere in South America, it's worse. Venezuela, you think Cuba, North Korea, Venezuela, Lebanon, war zones, Afghanistan, every single, tell me the country in Africa which has managed better than the US. Name the one. I give you the entire continent, right? It's kind of difficult to find even one country on earth. You're like, oh, I think the Singaporeans do a good job. Okay, you might find a city-state, one little city that sort of on some dimension is doing as well or better. But for the most part, there's 8 billion people on the planet, and there's 7.7 billion people that live in a place which is less, that's managed much less intelligently than the United States. So the losers are the authoritarians and the authorities that wish to impose a fiat currency on the 7.7 billion people that is more inflationary than the dollar. And while they're doing it, they will impose a fiat capital asset on the same 7 billion people. So, you know, we say, well, everybody should just use Bitcoin. Well, they should use Bitcoin, but the truth of the matter is, if you were an operating business in Argentina for the past 20 years, and you had 100 million pesos, if you had been able to swap it for $100 million on a digital currency network, you would still be rich.
The US has a unique opportunity here. By embracing stablecoins and licensing digital currency providers, it could create a massive demand for sovereign debt, stabilize global finance, and cement its position as the backbone of the monetary world. Meanwhile, Bitcoin offers a parallel system, giving people in unstable regions an alternative to failed fiat systems, creating a win-win scenario for economic empowerment.
And if you had been stuck in the peso, you would have been devalued 1,000 to 1, and you would be impoverished. And if you had bought Bitcoin, well, yeah, you would be like the richest person in the world, right? I mean, if you had bought $100 million of Bitcoin 20 years ago, I mean, you couldn't, but 10 years ago, yeah, you would be richer than Elon Musk. But the point is, and this is what I learned in my life, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And the message of the crypto renaissance to the Bitcoiners would be, yeah, Bitcoin is like a perfect solution. But the Argentinians didn't need the perfect solution. If they'd all picked the perfect solution, they'd be richer than Elon Musk and Bernard Arnault and Jeff Bezos right now. They didn't need that. They just needed a solution that was better than an awful one. And so in this particular case, a digital currency that spreads to the entire world, that's embraced by the world, would actually provide American prosperity to people in Africa, Asia, South America, ASEAN, Europe, and it would be I'm going to call it a gateway drug, right, to Bitcoin, right? I think that when you're in Nigeria, going to Tether, going to a digital currency that's backed by the US dollar is the obvious step. And after you get there, the next step would be go to digital capital, which is Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin it's not really competing with the currencies. The US dollar is going to actually replace the weak, defective, toxic currencies. People think, well, the US bonds, they're being attacked by Bitcoin. Well, let me turn it around. If we release digital currency, the digital currency is going to go to everywhere in the world, and US bonds are going to capitalize all those other countries. And I wouldn't choose US bonds to capitalize MicroStrategy, but if you were operating a business in Afghanistan or Lebanon or Argentina or Nigeria and you capitalize on US bonds, you would be rich. And so don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think digital currency is going to spread American values and spread Bitcoin values, eventually.
Digital currency, backed by the US dollar, isn't just about stabilizing collapsing economies. It's about introducing American financial stability to billions worldwide. It offers a practical solution for the present, paving the way for a future where Bitcoin becomes the ultimate store of value and freedom.
And it's a good thing, and it ought to be headquartered in America. And so that's number two. I got digital securities, digital currency. And the last observation is just, the world's better if we had digital tokens. If there's an ethically sound, economically sound, technically sound way to issue them. There's nothing wrong with Joe Rogan issuing Rogan token or Katy Perry issuing Katy Perry coin if it was fair and equitable, if he didn't lie, cheat, and steal, right? And if there's some utility, if you give someone digital utility, or if you just take the idea of, if I run a $5 million a year business, how do I sell securities to the public to raise $3 million? If the SEC makes you spend $50 million on lawyers and accountants in order to protect people that want to put $2 million at risk, it's like you can't buy a $50 million insurance policy to take a $2 million risk. And so what we need is a digital regime where I can do things 1 million times faster, 1 million times cheaper. And if I can do it 1 million times faster and cheaper, then I can deliver the promise of either digital securities or digital tokens to 400 million businesses instead of 4,000. And so, I do think after the red wave, there's a crypto renaissance that's coming, and I think the crypto renaissance is going to spark massive capital formation, and we're going to not have, there's 4,000 public companies, and there's like 40 everybody talks about. I mean, how many of the Russell 2000 do you trade? It's like I turn on CNBC, and it's like NVIDIA, Apple, Meta, NVIDIA, Tesla, NVIDIA, Apple, Meta, Microsoft. And it's like, well, what about the other 99.9%? And so what you realize is we have an antiquated oligopoly. We have an antiquated structure based on 20th century ideas. It's time for us to move into the 21st century. It's time for us to do things smarter, faster, stronger. It's time for us to serve the 8 billion people that are trying to make a life for themselves through the 400 million companies. And we should hold out the promise of technology. And the government's role, it isn't to tell you no. It isn't to sue you when you try to do something aspirational. The government's role is to provide an ethically sound, technically sound, economically sound way out of poverty. I mean, it could be as simple as, here are the asset classes. Don't lie, cheat, or steal, and you'll be fine. If you lie, cheat, or steal, we'll sue you. And if you actually want to be fair and equitable and just, fill out this form, give people this information, publish this, and then go take your risk. And if someone wants to take the risk with you, fine, let them do it. And sure, 99% of these ideas will fail in the market, but 1% will succeed, and the 1% that succeed will be SpaceX or Tesla or Apple or Edison Electric or Ford Motor Company or Standard Oil. And that's how we're going to power the civilization forward.
So if I could summarize everything you just said, it looks like we're witnessing the digitization of fiat currencies and eventually the tokenization of real-world assets to empower the individual through a set of digital solutions, with Bitcoin being really the pristine collateral and the deep store of value. And all of this will contribute through free enterprise to a more thriving global economy. Do I have everything you said kind of summarized?
I think so. I think it's not just empowering the individual, it's also empowering corporations.
The idea of a crypto renaissance driving capital formation and innovation at scale is transformative. Decentralized tokenization could unlock opportunity for millions of businesses and individuals, leveling the playing field in ways we've never seen. But does this vision hinge too heavily on regulatory reform, or is it inevitable with or without government support? Michael's entire monologue paints an ambitious vision of a financial revolution powered by digital currencies, Bitcoin, and tokenization. It effectively critiques current systems, calling out inefficiencies and emphasizing the need for pragmatic steps toward widespread adoption. Key takeaways for us were the emphasis on incremental steps, like adopting stablecoins before Bitcoin, highlights the importance of meeting people where they are rather than expecting immediate perfection. Bitcoin's impact rightly underscores how digital solutions could bring financial stability to underbanked regions, making a compelling case for the U.S. to lead this transformation.